Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. MoAD affirms Black Lives Matter in recognizing and condemning white supremacy and the ongoing systemic violence against Black people. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of Rekia Boyd, Laquan Mcdonald, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and Daunte Wright. We grieve for so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of state-sanctioned violence, including those whose names we do not know. We want to acknowledge that MoAD's commitment to racial justice is ongoing, and as such, we will continue to say their names and to hold space and honor these victims. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone peoples of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I welcome you to the program series African Diaspora Film Club, occurring monthly with Cornelius Moore, who is the co-director of California Newsreel, the 53-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent film curator specializing in works from and about the Black world. I want to thank Black Public Media for co-sponsoring the series, and to POV, PBS's award-winning nonfiction film series, for collaborating on this program with us. Today, we will discuss the documentary Unapologetic. If you haven't seen the film, it is streaming on PBS through February 26th, and I will put the link to it in the chat. After that, it will be available on Amazon Prime. We are thrilled to have joining us for the discussion director-producer Ashley O'Shea and producer Morgan Johnson. Ashley O'Shea is director of photography based in Chicago, Illinois, whose work focuses on illuminating marginalized voices. She has collaborated with a number of national brands, including Nike, Vox, Wilson Tennis, and Dr. Martens. Most recently, she filmed an international commercial spot for Wilson Tennis, with over 1 million views in digital markets. In 2020, she captured the final episode of Doc Martens' Tough As You series, starring the band Phony Ppl, accruing over 65,000 views on social and web. Her work also appeared in the critically acclaimed Lifetime docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. Although she has crafted many short films, Unapologetic is her first venture into the feature world. The film premiered at the 2020 BlackStar Film Festival and was shortlisted for the International Documentary Association Awards. Morgan Elise Johnson is an independent filmmaker and publisher. Her documentary career was born at Northwestern University and nurtured by Cartemquin Films' internship program. She grew to become a staff producer with Milwaukee-based 371 Productions. There she produced and co-directed the PBS World Channel documentary, There Are Jews Here, which premiered at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival in 2015, and then toured for 2 years before its national PBS World Channel broadcast. She also associate produced a virtual reality documentary about abortion clinic harassment called Across the Line, which premiered at Sundance Film Festival's New Frontiers exhibit. Her life and career evolved when she left 371 in 2016 and co-created The Tribe, a digital publication and production company dedicated to reshaping the narrative of Black Chicago, which has earned Morgan a spot on Forbes 30 Under 30 Media Class of 2019 and New City's Film 50 list. We'll start the discussion with Cornelius, Ashley, and Morgan, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments and sharing reactions in the chat and submitting questions through the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type where you are joining us from in the chat. We love finding the diaspora in our audience. So thank you, Cornelius and Ashley and Morgan, and please take it away.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome, Morgan and Ashley. Thank you for being with us today. And
Thank you for
good
having
to
us.
see you again. Yeah. I've seen the film a number of times. I mean, I saw it when it premiered at BlackStar, and I thought it was great then, and a champion of it, and I think it's wonderful, and it is a very great resource and gives people an idea about organizing and different kind of leadership, and particularly young Black women's leadership. I remember I did watch the broadcast, and I noticed that I want to ask you about if there's differences in the festival and theatrical version and the broadcast version, other than the beeping out of cuss words.
That aggressive bleeping sound. Yes, we were not prepared for that. There aren't any. We didn't have to like cut down the film or anything like that for the broadcast, but we actually did end up adapting one of the scenes that you see in the film. Originally, there's a scene where Janaé's talking about, she's in her office talking about her PhD, kind of what she plans to write her dissertation about and do her research about. And then there's a moment where she's reflecting on a photo of her dad when he was organizing on his college campus and when she was organizing for Rekia Boyd. And so that was originally kind of an edit trick that we did. And because from that moment, she kind of talks about how her dad is the reason that she became interested in the criminal legal system. But was actually at the time referring to her uncle, who was imprisoned for much of her life, and shortly after he was released from prison was murdered. And originally we had kind of had both the dad moment and the uncle moment in the film, but you know, in true like having to cut things down fashion, it felt like we were kind of doing too many things in that scene, and it was already kind of long enough. So originally we kind of conflated the two moments, but in the spirit of accountability and Janaé really expressing to us that she felt like it was a misrepresentation of why she became involved in the work, we actually decided to change it. Well, we basically just made the moment completely about her uncle that was in prison and kind of lost the moment with her dad, but I think his spirit is still in the film. And she was really grateful for that change in the film. And, you know, unless you are myself or Morgan or somebody else on the film team, I don't think anyone noticed, hopefully. So that was the only change. We were lucky enough to just have to like cut down our credits to be able to meet the POV broadcast time.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. You know, it's helpful for me as a viewer to know that. I wanted to begin with a quote from you, Ashley, that's on your website, and the website for unapologeticfilm.com. Right, that's the website.
Yep.
That you put up right before the broadcast. And by the way, thank you. Congratulations again for the broadcast. As Black people, we often learn agency in life later than we should, leaving those in power to determine the narrative and shape popular media perceptions. Yes, we're talking to you, distributors. Being a distributor, I'll hear that. Unapologetic exists in direct contrast to this. Made by young Black people, owned by young Black people, released by young Black people. It exists in the same tradition that led Fannie Lou Hamer to co-found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and Ida B. Wells to investigate and write about the lynching of Black people. Reclaiming that power is undoubtedly difficult to do, especially in your 20s, living in a city like Chicago. So I just wanted to begin with that to ask you, you're saying this at the end of after the film has been done. This is a 5-year journey, right?
Yes. Yes.
So tell us, both you, Ashley, and Morgan, how you came to this project, and also and met the participants.
Yeah. Thank you for reading our our blog post. We were frantically writing that the morning of the broadcast. So we appreciate you reading that. But yeah, so I originally came to the project in the fall of 2015. And I was beginning an internship at Cartemquin Films where Morgan also interned. But this was also around the time that young Black people were continuing to organize around the killing specifically of Rekia Boyd. It was so present in the public space and on just like social media, the work that these young Black people were doing, that it was very difficult to look away. I originally just went in kind of wanting to see what type of work these young Black people were doing in Chicago. And as I went into these spaces where they were organizing these specific campaigns, I realized that a lot of people that were being centered and forefronted in the movement were young Black women and queer folks, and just people with these identities that aren't often talked about when we think about Black social movements of the past. So I originally went in just wanting to highlight Janaé specifically because she was the head of the Chicago chapter of BYP 100 at the time. And she was also in her first semester of her PhD program. And I kind of just approached her with like a cold email and was like, hey, I have this idea for like a short film that I think could be really cool to just like highlight this one person within this larger movement. But then shortly after we started filming, in November of that year, they released the tape of the killing of Laquan Mcdonald. And the city was just buzzing with like an energy that you could tell is not something that happens every year or every 5 years even. And so I had originally kind of entered it just thinking I was gonna track this one person's journey within the leadership of an organization and in her social work program. But, you know, I think as we were beginning production, I had a realization that telling this film from the perspective of another young Black woman was really unique, and was really a counter narrative to the sensationalized media that we were often seeing around the movement for Black lives. And so that's when I kind of hesitantly leaned in a little bit more, and I met Bella shortly thereafter, actually after the police superintendent was forced to resign, that performance that she has in the film. That's where I first met her. And I really was just like exploring other possible participants at the time. But, you know, you have one conversation with Bella or experience one performance by her, and it's just, I was just like, that's the person. So. Morgan, you look like you were, I was like, she unmuted herself. So.
Hello, everyone. And I want to say hi to Gordon Quinn, one of our producers. I got involved with Unapologetic about 6 months after I moved back to Chicago in February of 2017. So Ashley had already been out in the field filming a lot of the film by herself by the time that I got involved. And as soon as I really returned to Chicago, because I'm from the area, I went to Northwestern, and I was an intern at Cartemquin Films, you know, the Cartemquin film family started to nudge me and be like, okay, so you're here, you're gonna be making films. And I was like, no, not yet. But they kept telling me about Unapologetic and that they really thought I would be a good fit as a producer for this film. And I did end up bumping into Ashley and asking her to send me a demo of what she had. And I remember being so drawn to the participants, Janaé and Bella, and could see a story playing out, you know, following their journeys. And I ended up sending her just paragraphs of notes about how I saw this film going, and ended up being involved from that point on. But I think even more than that, we were at this very urgent stage as young people in Chicago, where, you know, February 2017, Donald Trump was being inaugurated. I was starting a company in Chicago called The Tribe, where I was very much interested in telling Black stories. So it is a publication. And I wasn't so much interested in so-called, you know, the unbiased storytelling that I was brought up to champion, because I thought, that doesn't really exist. We need truth tellers in this moment that are going to speak out for Black Chicagoans. And so the work that I was doing in starting my company in the tribe was very much in alignment with what Ashley was doing with Unapologetic. I had never seen a project that was told through a Black queer feminist lens. And so I wanted to be a part of it.
Well, I want to also acknowledge in the blog that you, Morgan, you brought in the issue about Kwanzaa and the history of Kwanzaa and the US organization and all those things very bravely that people kind of forget and don't mention about, some of the violence against Black women and the undercover stuff that happened against the Black Panther Party. So thank you for doing that. And I encourage people to go online and read what Morgan has to say about that. This is a segue into the issue of Black queer feminist lens. Did I get the order right? Was that right? Yeah, because I wanted to talk about that a little bit, not get very theoretical, but Unapologetic is also the name of the book by the founding director of Black Youth Project 100, which is one of the organizations that profiled in the film that Janaé's involved with. And your film is autonomous from all the organizations and the theory and everything, but I wanted to explore what that means, and as far as organizing and how it affects your film. And I'm going to read from what Charlene said about a Black queer feminist lens. She said, I define the Black queer feminist lens as a political practice in theory based in Black feminist and LGBTQ traditions and knowledge, through which people and groups see to bring their full selves into the process of dismantling all systems of oppression. Organizing through Black queer feminist lens is inherently collaborative and not antagonistic to other radical feminisms or liberatory practices, politics and practices. Taking up Black queer feminist practice of community organizing recognizes those who came before us, and helps us to see where we want to go. So I was just curious.
She said it better than we ever could.
But I'd like to hear how that affected what you did with the film and the
For sure.
organizing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see Charlene is even briefly featured in the film as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that lens is a perspective from which a lot of young Black organizations were organizing at the time. Definitely BYP 100, but also a lot of other collectives and groups here in Chicago. And it really gets at this idea of one, I think, intersectionality, and just thinking about how as Black women, as Black queer women, as people that exist at these multiple identities, that we aren't necessarily stripping a part of ourselves when we enter a space. We're not just entering as Black or as queer or as women. It's really entering as the kind of amalgamation of all of those. And so I think as folks were forefronting that in the practice of community organizing here in Chicago, it's really with this idea that so often in Black social movements, we have seen this perspective of the Black male really centered and uplifted in a way that can leave out some other marginalized identities within Blackness itself. And I think the easiest way that I've seen it explained is just thinking about people that are marginalized even further within marginalized groups. And if we're centering the perspective of those furthest at the margins, when we're talking about these ideas of freedom and liberation, that once we achieve those from this perspective, that it automatically brings that same freedom and liberation to Black men, to hetero Black women, et cetera, because we're centering those furthest at the margins. And so the film was really done in the spirit of that. I think especially because we really refused to kind of even, I guess, counterbalance Janaé and Bella with, I guess, like a Black male perspective or with a more mainstream perspective, because we felt that we really wanted to illuminate the work they were doing in the spirit of what they were doing. But I also think it's challenging in the media space as well to say this very specific marginalized group, we're going to place them at the center, and not really have any type of apology about it. And I think that was really in trying to honor and respect the work that they were doing in their organizations, but also to hopefully kind of move it along as well, and showing all that they were able to achieve. Because I think there's a lot of people on the counter side of it saying like, that's not how we should do it, or that's not effective. And it's very clear from watching the film that they were able to make all of these shifts and gains because they were centering that perspective.
So you've been at a lot of screenings and you've had conversations and feedback from community, and I'm just curious what the response is for the film, given that you're very upfront about what the perspective is.
You got it, Morgan.
We've had our fair share of people just being like, I don't get it, or this film clearly was not for me. Where are the men? And my response is usually, do you say that when you watch films about Black male leaders? Do you say, where are the women? Do you say, where are the gay people? Do you say, where are the trans people? Like, we are very conditioned to view everything from a cis heteronormative, even Christian perspective of what is being Black in America, what is a Black family, what is Black liberation. And if it doesn't look like that, then we can't view freedom within that lens. So this film is very much challenging that. And one time I asked the whole audience of people to raise their hand if they ever saw a film that was centering Black queer women, and they couldn't do it. So it's just like, so you're telling us that we should include these other voices when you've never sat down for 90 minutes and watched Black
a
queer
film
women?
not centered on you.
Yeah. Truly absurd. And so, this film is really challenging that perspective and asking for us to stretch ourselves and our imagination and think about ways to include other voices and theologies within our frameworks when we do this type of work.
Great, I applaud you for doing it, and it certainly is. I can see it being challenging to audiences as you indicate, Morgan. The other thing, so there are a lot of things in the film, but that I noticed, but one of them is that you're very intimate with the participants, and you're all up in their lives. The dinner table,
embedded.
Embedded in such that it's like, oh well, you're even referred to like in some of the scenes. So how did you establish the rapport with them and the trust in them in making this film?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a step-by-step process. I think, Janaé and Bella are two unique individuals in themselves. So, with Janaé, I think there was a little bit less hesitancy. I mean, there was definitely less hesitancy in terms of me going behind the veil, I guess, beyond just what she was doing at public events or campaigns. And throughout the whole process, I tried to be as transparent as possible with both of them about not only what I was planning to do, but also explaining to them, the value of an audience seeing these intimate moments in their lives, or being like, trying to explain to them like, yes, I want to come to your birthday. And I know it has nothing to do necessarily directly with the movement work you're doing, but it's important and essential that people understand that you exist outside of just organizing. Because I think a lot of times the Black Lives Matter movement gets grouped in as like just this one big monolith of people constantly working or campaigning that don't have any type of outside influence in their lives. But you talk to any organizer I know, and they have a lot of personal experiences that have led them to even want to organize. So with Janaé, I think that was a little bit of an easier process. And then with Bella, it was definitely a trust building exercise, because I think she was comfortable with me, you know, coming to her public events and performances, because that was often where she would interact with other media people as well. But I think especially, you know, when we realized that we wanted to go deeper into the storyline about her family's history with incarceration, and her family's history on the West Side, that's something that she treats very privately, and delicately, not only for herself, but also in protection of her mom and her dad and other people within her family. And so that was something I would say we didn't really like make a big leap in until almost the end of the end of being done with the film. I think the last scene we filmed actually was when we went to visit her brother in prison. But I think that just goes to show the sometimes the concessions you have to make in order to reach that emotional depth with your participants. And I think for both of them, the fact that I was also, you know, around the same age as them, figuring out my career and my life alongside them, brought them a lot of comfort in a way that, you know, if I was maybe more established, that connection may not have been as felt. But, you know, I view both of them as friends of mine. And I wanted the film to feel like, you know, one of their girlfriends was just making a film about them. So I think constantly just being as transparent and communicative as possible eventually got us there with both of them. And yeah, I mean, it seemed like the effect was felt by audience members.
Well, I mean, particularly, I thought with Bella, going from being an artist and organizer and getting a fellowship and applying for that, what's the next stage? I mean, I think people have outside the movement, don't have a sense of how people are going to make a living and what they're going to do with their talents and their organizing. What's the next stage? So that I appreciate what you did with her. And with Janaé, I got a BA and I was done.
Me too, Cornelius. Watching Janaé, I was like, I'm good.
She had to go through all that to start her PhD. So
yeah, exactly.
I don't think people who are not involved in that world had a sense of that either. So I'm appreciating that too.
Yes, I did not know there were that many steps to even become a PhD candidate. I was like, oh, that's a step before the dissertation? Okay, got it.
So tell us about where they both are now in their life trajectory and their career.
Yes, so Morgan, you got it.
Okay, I can start with Bella. Because, you know, as Ashley said, getting to know Bella was definitely a journey. We had to learn like what's gonna help her engage, because sometimes she would kind of disappear and go off the map for us. And it really took us a while to build that trust with her. But we got there. And Bella and I now are much closer, and we actually have a working relationship. She works with the tribe as a columnist. She has a column called the Revolutionary Column, where she challenges us on revolutionary thought monthly. So you can definitely check that out on thetribe.com. And she's also working on music, but you know, she's always telling us that she's working on music. And we're just like, girl, when are you dropping the tracks? But yeah, she's supposed to be working on some new music as well. And she's also been a part of a couple of other video projects and documentaries. She worked on one with you, Ashley, right?
Yeah, she actually, I think the most recent music release was a campaign she was doing for a group called Acres of Ancestry that was working to bring debt relief to Black farmers in the South. So we collaborated on that last February, and it's on her website, bellaboss.com. But yeah, we are trying to get her to release this EP. I think we've both heard music from it, and I'm like, this is like stadium status, like you. But she's like many Black women, also a perfectionist, so I understand her hesitancy. Yeah, and then Janaé is she is a doctor now. She has successfully defended her dissertation. She actually moved back to South Carolina, got married, and is pregnant with her first child. So
life really
she had
happened.
a lot of life moments this past year. And she works now for the National, I'm gonna mess it up, I think it's the National Black Women's Justice Institute, as I believe a senior policy researcher, and is working to turn her dissertation into a book. So she has been very busy, but a lot of well-deserved milestones after many years of work.
Is Bella's the project that she was doing, is that still going on? Did it get refunded, or what happened with that?
Sister Survivor.
Yes.
I think she is looking still. It's still in existence, yes, but I think she's really trying to figure out what her kind of next big organizing move is. I think that year in the Soros Justice Fellowship really showed her how much it can be to run a nonprofit and run an organization. So I think she's still just figuring out how to align her work around Black women re-entering society from prison. I know she's talked about wanting to open it up like an alternative school. So she's still, really trying to figure out how to continue to get like financial support and logistical support to run something, I think, a little bit more long-term.
Okay. And also the organization. I'm curious about Black Youth Project 100 and with it. That's the one that most.
As far as I know, BYP 100 is still maintaining its 10 chapters across the country. I know they celebrated their 5-year, I think in 2019. And at some point, Janaé was actually in Charlene's old position as the national director. But they're continuing. I know their most recent campaign around the She Safe, it's called She Safe, We Safe, or specifically around Black women and trans folks' safety, and really in alignment with a lot of what Janaé talks about in her dissertation, just alternative avenues to safety for Black women and girls. So they're continuing their work across the country. And yeah, I think just continuing to be a pretty big support for the movement for Black lives.
What role do you think the film has as a resource for organizers? I mean, with the release before the broadcast, what tell us about those connections that you made?
I think for me, I definitely see Unapologetic existing in this lexicon of archiving our Black movements. I think something that sets it apart is that it's following a contemporary as it's happening movement, as opposed to looking at something through a more historical lens. So I think its immediate effect was really, when we released in late summer of 2020, it was right on the heels of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of the uprisings around their deaths. So I think the film's effect was really that it served as a blueprint to movement work that was happening as early as 2015 in Chicago around these concepts of defunding the police and police abolition, and really was kind of like the groundwork that allowed those types of phrases and those types of conversations to enter like popular conversation in 2020. I don't think any of us really imagined that abolition would be like a term that like city councils and local governments across the country were like actually entertaining, or even defunding the police. Is a huge step in a lot of smaller, or just in cities in general. So I see it existing in that type of way, that it's showing. It's just showing another example of the way that you can approach this work. and hopefully also just making it feel more accessible, you know, and thinking about, again, how these two women exist outside of just their organizing work, and see their separate interests as like direct contributions to how they organize. So just in people even wanting to participate or join in this movement, not feeling like they have to be a very specific identity or have a specific academic background to get involved. And so I think Janaé and Bella really give a good kind of polar opposite, not polar opposite, but, you know, just a good complementary balance in how you can approach this work as a young person.
Another positive impact of the film that I want to highlight is that we've been getting some correspondence from folks who are incarcerated and saying that the film has inspired them, and that it's great to see that organizers are thinking of them and organizing on their behalf. So that's been very inspiring for us, and especially for Bella, who's been so touched by incarceration. She sends us those messages as she gets them, because a lot of times people contact her directly and said, hey, thank you for what you're doing on behalf of incarcerated families and for getting this message out there. So that really means a lot to us.
So the families who are on the outside, they get to see it. How do people in the inside get to see the film? If you could
PBS.
talk about that. Okay.
No, it's PBS.
Okay.
It's literally PBS.
Okay.
I guess, so we had our initial broadcast on the 27th, but then it re-aired a few more times throughout the week. And I guess they just turned to the channel on the, because I think we always kind of, it's been an impact goal of ours to reach incarcerated populations, but we never had kind of really figured out how to navigate that, especially with this film being from such, what I would assume is such a radical lens to like a prison warden. But you can't stop PBS from coming on the TV. So yeah, this is our great public broadcasting system.
Okay. And this is in a, certainly, to say the least, a challenging time to release a film. Doing
Yes.
either via festivals or theatrically with COVID and everything. So, but I noticed that you did have a theatrical release in August 2021.
Yes.
And please tell us about that. And Black August is important because of the dates of Black Liberation dates in that month too. So
yes,
tell us about
yes, you are catching all the stuff.
I try.
Yeah, so we I think so. We, you know, we spent much of the remainder of 2020 and early 2021 taking the film out to other virtual festival spaces, but we were continuing to look for distribution partners, knowing that we had POV locked in, but you know, also wanting to like exploit our rights in other markets, and we really just weren't finding a lot of luck in the theatrical space specifically. You know, I think in a lot of ways, because of COVID, a lot of distributors were not really seeing it as like a revenue, an income model for them in 2021. So it wasn't really, everyone we kind of talked to, it didn't feel like anyone had like an excitement about it. And so I think in early summer of last year, we just had a discussion amongst the team about, you know, whether we were capable and prepared to do our own theatrical. And I think in many ways it was one, to have the film have its moment in the sun. You know, we had been in a lot of really great virtual fests, but we hadn't really had that experience of like directly connecting with audiences, or like, I didn't know until I saw it in a theater what it feels like to like see it in a theater, you know, despite having a lot of really great support around all of the virtual premieres. And so we collaborated with Cartemquin, as well as the Film Collaborative, which is a distribution firm based out of LA, to do like a limited theatrical in Chicago, New York, and LA. We were able to plan a lot of really great impact specific events, especially in Chicago, and have different panels around intergenerational strategies for organizing and Black women in film. And so it was just like, yeah, it was just awesome to have that moment in the sun, and especially with Janaé and Bella. You know, I think if anything, I wanted them to feel the impact that their work was having on audiences across all demographics, and so being able to take them along with us was really unforgettable as well.
Were any of those audience engagement and screenings, were they recorded?
Yes, and we actually, if you go to our website, we just launched our impact page, which has all of the recordings from those screenings up. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's good. Tell us about any screenings or programs outside the U.S.
Like I have to rack my memory. I'm like, how many have we had? So I know we, excuse me. We've had a really good response across the international diaspora, I think, in a way that is counter to some conversations we had that Black people outside the U.S. don't care, or that this impacts them in a specific way. So I know we premiered at the Inside Out festival in Toronto. So we've had a good number of Canadian screenings. We did Cinema Africa, which is based out of Sweden. We actually were just in South Korea, like in the fall last year, and I think in Australia at some point, which was just like, even seeing the Korean Black connection of like audiences and the reaction those audiences had was really touching. And then, you know, of course, we did the festival in Colombia, and we've had some Central American screenings as well. I'm still trying to get to Europe and like and have our moment there. But yeah, we've touched a good amount of places outside of the U.S. And I think are still trying to figure out some international distribution options now that we've kind of figured it out here domestically.
Well, I mean, I think it's very important because certainly Black people in the Americas and Europe have a similar relationship to the police and the carceral state. So
I should say too, I'm remembering when we did the Q&A for the Human Rights Watch, the London Human Rights Watch Festival, and our moderator just speaking to us about, I can't remember exactly what had just happened, but something with the UK police, like some policy had just come down, and at that exact moment, people were out in the streets protesting and organizing. So it was just like, there's direct connections everywhere because, you know, imperialism isn't just in the US. So it definitely is great to see how people relate to it in that way.
Well, thank you for that, and for informing us about what's been happening. So I certainly don't feel this way, but I've just been hearing, you know, the backlash, like it was 2020, and you know, everything was happening, and people in the streets, and you know, Black people have been heard, and let's move on. And well, yeah, I guess I don't agree with that, but have you heard any of that kind of reaction to the film? Like, oh well, you know, well that is yesterday, and now we're looking to something else. They probably wouldn't tell you to your face, but
distributors have, you know, where they think, you know, especially, you know, the big name distributors and networks and things like that have said that. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like documentaries are being produced much faster, and there's not a lot of like, there seems to be like a quick turnover on documentaries that are not necessarily verite, where they're following people over time. There's been these extended kind of like news documentaries that people are putting out in direct response to some kind of like injustice happening. So we've seen that, you know, And it kind of worries me, that trend, because this film is very much not that. We really took our time and got to know these participants, and was very, we were very thoughtful about the messages that we put in the film. Not saying that other people aren't, but I'm not into the microwave documentary trend where it's just like we feel like we have to respond right away and make a film in 3 months or something about an event that just occurred. I do think that sometimes you need time. You know, people need time to really take something in and think about it. And we need time to to be able to even see the ripple effects of an event unfold. And so that's what I say to these people who think, oh, we're past this moment. Of course, like Black people aren't free. So of course we're not past this moment. It may be past the point of you wanting to talk about it still. But for the people who actually live this work, live this reality of racism in America, this conversation, it's not over.
And your work is collaborative, and also you're not extracting from the participants. You're involved with them, and that's a distinct difference from your film and quite a few others that are driven by a news cycle. So I want to appreciate and thank you for that. We get a question specifically about any screenings in Latin America. We did talk about the Festival Internacional de Cinema in Colombia, in Medellin. But Brazil, Argentina, Brazil would be, I think, really important to do because of the Black movement.
I think we may have.
I think we did.
I cannot remember. I think we did do a festival in Brazil that we weren't able to. It was virtual, so we weren't able to like see it because it was during peak COVID times. But I do remember a specific. I think it was a more community-based festival. I'll have to look it up to tell you that happened in Brazil that we did. Yeah, I would love to keep tapping into. I think the Afro-Latino demographic as well, because I know that there's a lot of resistance movements in Central and South America as well that have really made some major strides in the past few years. But I know we did one. I just can't remember exactly what it was called.
Okay. I'm gonna. I see that there's some questions here, and one is from Ronald saying, given some tensions in the Black-Asian relationship, can you please elaborate more on the reactions during the South Korean screening? Thank you for the film.
I cannot say more because I'm basing this off of what the programmers share with us. So that was another one where we weren't able to attend virtually, but we're given a lot of information based off of the programmers about the connections with the South Korean movement. But again, I would have to look specifically. I know that one too was actually physical in theaters with audiences. So so yeah, I know that it resonated with a lot of folks there, but unfortunately we weren't able to attend that either.
Ronald, Bella wrote about this on The Tribe, the tension between Black people and Asians. And I mean, in short, the argument is that any tension between marginalized groups is actually rooted in white supremacy. That's where it comes from, you know, where we are fighting each other instead of looking at like, why are we fighting for the same resources? Why is there scarcity here? It's because we share an oppressor there. So we need to think about that tension within that framework and then reassess who we're going after here and what the goal is here. But yeah, check that out on thetribe.com.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, and Elizabeth just put the link to thetribe.com.
I'll try to find that article for you too. So and drop it in the chat.
So I keep hearing it must be very frustrating to not be able to be at these screenings, because I mean I would want to know and get the immediate reaction and have the dialogue with people. But I guess there is the plus is that, you know, sometimes you can have access to people you wouldn't necessarily, but if things were done virtually, but there's nothing replaces the in-person connections that people can have. So, well, the film will continue, and hopefully there'll be opportunities for you to be in person with some of the audiences. So we know that the film is going to be able to be watched through September online via PBS and also on Amazon Prime. Post that.
February. I think
what did I say?
I think you said September.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. Thank you for catching it. February.
200 days streaming. No worries.
Okay, no, good. I'm glad you got it. What's next for you? For each of you?
Yeah, so I've actually been even in the midst of the release of Unapologetic, I actually started development on 2 new projects. One is a docuseries that follows my family patriarch, who raised 17 children, all from Mobile and Tuskegee, Alabama. And so it's really following collections of rememories and reenactments with his children and his grandchildren, to look at how he raised this very successful group of Black people, all from the small town South and very poor and rural upbringings. So I'm doing a personal doc. I don't know why, but I felt it in my spirit and in my grandfather's spirit. And then I'm also working on a project that I can't really speak specifically about, but it follows a major event that happened in Indianapolis in the 90s from the criminal legal perspective. So I've been knee deep in both of those, and I'm continuing to work freelance gigs as a cinematographer, because that was always my first love. So I'm trying. I'm like, call me for those so I can pay for the films.
Well, we should have your email. I mean, can people get a hold of you through the website?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Okay. And if you go to ashleyoshay.com, I also have a personal website that has ways to get in contact.
Okay.
And I am all the time publisher of The Tribe. News never stops, and Chicago just keeps on getting in the national conversation somehow. Even today, it's like the battle between CPS and Mayor Lori Lightfoot versus the Chicago Teachers Union over COVID safety protocols. It's like everybody's watching what's going on in Chicago, and Chicagoans are always leading the fight in terms of activism. So I always have my eye on that, and shaping those narratives through The Tribe.
Okay. Yeah, I do notice that Chicago's in the news a lot, and I think even the issues that you discuss, even with COVID and the schools, that other cities across the country are having to deal with that, and with what safety for teachers and safety for students and the like, as well as the police and the violence that goes on. So people should definitely check out Morgan's publication, The Tribe. So
Elizabeth is on it with these links.
Oh, yeah, right. Great. Yeah, that's better for me. So was there anything else that you wanted to say? We're like 3 minutes away from ending, but
can I jump in and say that there is another question in the chat?
Oh, good. What was it?
Patry asks, in the scene between the elders and the younger activists, I detected something of a disconnect. Did you sense that? Do any of the post-screening comments raise this issue?
Thank you.
Yes, that was a excerpt of a scene that I so wish could have been fleshed out in full, but it was an intergenerational conversation between now one of our ancestors, Tim Well Black, a very long-term activist in Chicago, that Bella was moderating, and they were really just talking about the changes in Chicago's Black population over many, many years, and how we connect to our community leaders and activists. And I think something Bella is stating in the moment is really just the kind of lack of connect we often see now between the younger generation and our elders, for lack of a better term, especially in this age of social media and instant gratification, where all this information is constantly at our fingertips, but we aren't as often sitting at the feet of our elders and just talking to them about their experiences and what they go through. But I also think there's often sometimes a judgment that comes from the other side around how young folks are deciding to organize or present themselves or identify. And so that it was really a really generative space. Actually, we just showed the moment of tension, for filmmaking purposes. But I think a lot of people left that space wanting to continue to have conversations like that with people in their own families and communities. And we actually had a panel. We held a panel on that exact topic during the theatrical with Dr. Fanny Rushing, who was integral in bringing Chicago its freedom schools. So in terms of people's reaction, I think people have actually been really open, and it's actually created a lot of connections across generations to allow people to have those conversations, because so much of what we have seen in the movements in the 60s and the Black Power movement, I was like, I'm seeing this again in today's movement for Black lives. And so I think it's just really important to talk person to person sometimes, as opposed to trying to read a book about it or read some philosophy about it. Sometimes, your father or your mother or your grandfather or grandmother have already gone through it, and can help you navigate those difficult moments in organizing now.
Morgan, did you have something to say about that?
No, I think she covered it.
Okay. I'm so glad for that question, because it was something that I thought about too in watching that scene. And I did not realize that Mr. Ppl Black has made this transition.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, I'm the one that broke it to you.
No. He was the father of a friend of mine who also made his transition years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I had met him years ago when he came out to visit his son Kerry.
I mean, he was 90 something when we filmed that, and I was like, I want your help at 90, because he definitely made an amazing impact on Chicago. So we're so thankful for his work.
And he's in a lot of films about Chicago, about Black Chicago. I mean, he's a go-to person.
Right.
He has that history. You're definitely right. So I was really glad to see him in your film.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, I don't think there are any more questions. And I'm really so appreciative of you being here today and the conversation we're having. And I hope we continue to have conversations about your work that you're doing. Thank you, Ashley O'Shea and Morgan Johnson.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure.
I want to thank all of you for today's conversation, and thank you for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to seeing what you do in the future and bringing it to MoAD as well. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today for the conversation. And I want to let you know that our next African Diaspora Film Club will be on Sunday, February 6th at 5 p.m. Pacific. And we'll be discussing the documentary Ailey with director Jamila Wigno. And I also encourage anyone, I put a link in the chat for a survey, a virtual program survey. If you can take a moment to fill that out, it should also pop up on your browser when you close the Zoom. We love hearing feedback about our programming. If you are so inclined and would like to donate to MoAD, we of course appreciate any size donation. You can do that on our website, moadsf.org/donate, or you can text 56512 and write MoAD SF and follow the link to donate. And lastly, thank you so much to Black Public Media and POV for partnering with us on this program series and today's program. So thank you all and have a lovely evening.
All right.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Good night.